What is the moral obligation of society to provide life-saving technology to everyone who needs it? Emergency sleeping bags cost $12 to manufacture, but their absence costs human lives. Today, I'm exploring the ethics of survival and why access to basic life-saving technology should be a human right. The philosophical framework begins with a simple premise. If technology exists that can prevent deaths from exposure, what moral justification exists for limiting access to that technology based on economic factors? Emergency sleeping bags prevent deaths that are entirely preventable given current technology and manufacturing capabilities. Every person who dies from exposure while this technology exists represents a moral failure of distribution rather than technological limitation. The utilitarian calculus is straightforward. The cost of universal access to emergency thermal protection is minuscule compared to the human value of lives saved. Society spends more money on entertainment than it would cost to provide life-saving emergency gear to everyone. Rights-based philosophical approaches suggest that access to basic survival technology falls under fundamental human rights to life and safety. If society has the capability to prevent preventable deaths, it has the obligation to do so. The social contract theory implies that governments exist partly to protect citizens from preventable harm. When technology exists to prevent exposure deaths but isn't accessible to all citizens, governments fail their basic protective function. Distributive justice questions focus on why life-saving technology should be distributed based on ability to pay rather than need for protection. Emergency sleeping bags work the same for wealthy and poor people, but access depends on economic status rather than vulnerability to exposure. The capability approach in philosophy suggests that societies should ensure all people have access to basic capabilities for survival and human flourishing. Access to emergency thermal protection clearly falls under basic survival capabilities. Religious and secular ethical systems converge on obligations to preserve human life when preservation is possible and affordable. Emergency sleeping bags represent exactly this scenario. Preservation is both possible and affordable. The tragedy of preventable deaths becomes a moral indictment when prevention technology exists but isn't deployed due to economic rather than technical barriers. Society chooses to allow preventable deaths rather than fund prevention. International human rights law increasingly recognizes access to basic life-saving technologies as fundamental rights rather than economic privileges. Emergency preparedness falls under state obligations to protect citizens from preventable harm. The philosophical argument extends beyond individual ethics to collective responsibility. Societies that allow preventable deaths while possessing prevention technology bear collective moral responsibility for those deaths. Economic arguments about market distribution of life-saving technology fail philosophical scrutiny when the technology is affordable and the deaths are entirely preventable. Market failure in distributing life-saving technology requires moral intervention. The intergenerational justice perspective suggests current generations have obligations to ensure future generations inherit effective life-saving technologies and systems. Climate change makes this obligation more urgent as survival challenges increase. Ultimately, the philosophical question reveals that access to basic emergency preparedness technology represents a test of societal values and priorities. Societies that provide universal access demonstrate commitment to fundamental human dignity and equality.